Today we're going to take a look at a very unique shield, something that could have been developed as a direct response to a particular weapon that was ruling the battlefield, but also works really well against a number of different weapons. All in today's episode of Han Dynasty Weapons. In the Han Dynasty, the Ji Halberd was the king of the battlefield. It was such an effective weapon that other weapons were designed in response. One such shield was designed in direct response to the Ji that had the ability to act as a second sword, quick and nimble, but also had the ability to trap, control, and even disarm the opponent, and even had a spike for up-close attacks. This is the hook shield from the Han Dynasty. It's called the Gou Rang or gourang, and as you can see here, it has an appearance very unique that we don't see in many other shields. It has a small buckler type shield that protects the fist, as well as two hooks protruding, similar to an unstrung bow, and of course a forward protruding spike from the shield that allows for up-close piercing attacks. The protruding curve of the shield not only acts as knuckle and hand protection, but also works to distribute the impact force of an oncoming strike that could possibly break the shield or the grip if strong enough. The shape of the buckler shield actually is very similar to the shape of much larger shields used at the time. And each edge and ledge on this shield serves as a point to catch the enemy's weapon, but could also be a resting point for the sword in maybe a joint attack. Protective coverage may seem a little minimalistic, especially when comparing to other shields of the time. However, the design of the shield allows for much more mobility and speed, and the extending hooks can screen and trap an oncoming advance, which can make up for the lack of wall-like protection that you would see in other shields. Many believe that the gourang was designed in specific response to the Ji Halberd, as the hook could trap and control the side blade, limit the amount of retrieval, and create openings for counterattack. While others believe that it wouldn't have the capabilities to actually control the weapon, as well as the leverage and strength, because you would have two hands holding onto the Ji versus one hand holding the shield. As for me, I agree with the second group. Now, I was personally able to handle and do some light sparring with the gourang thanks to the people over at lkchen who have made this possible by not only creating these, but sending one out for me to test out and review. After a short time of sparring, it became quickly apparent to me that the hand position holding the shield, as well as the speed of attack and withdraw, even at light sparring, I don't think that this would be sufficient to hook and control and trap the Ji, as they say, especially with the full speed and power that would be used on the battlefield. Not to mention, if making contact or hooking the Ji, it still has an opportunity for that blade to get behind the shield and attack the hand. So there is still a risk within that. Now, that's not to say that hooking and trapping does not work. It's very effective, especially with the extended hooks. However, that does bring me to another important part of sparring, and one of the things that I was able to note. When you're focusing singly on just trying to hook the opponent's weapon, and that becomes your main method of defense or counterattack, oftentimes what happens is you end up just chasing the opponent's weapon, which leads to creating more openings and vulnerabilities for your opponent to attack you. I have noticed this as well in many of the videos online that I've seen of people testing out the gourang in sparring and fencing. This is not to say that hooking shouldn't be used. There are definite advantages to using the hooks. However, I firmly believe that the shield should be used as a secondary defense, and the main focus should be on using the sword as your main point of attack and defense. In other words, keep the shield vertical and not overextended. This and using the sword as if single-handed will create a much stronger baseline when in combat. Only after a solid foundation is achieved should more advanced techniques like hooking and trapping and manipulating the opponent's weapon or the opponent's shield should be attempted. Now, of course, this is just from my limited experience in using this shield and what I've noticed that's been posted in online videos, and it's just my opinion, so take it for what it's worth. I do feel that the Gou Rang could eventually have a rebirth and become just as effective now in dueling and fencing as it once was in the Han Dynasty. And thanks to people like Chen that not only manufacture these and ship them out around the world so people can experience this, but they also produce plans for people that are so inclined to make them themselves. So all the materials are here, all the resources are here. All we need now is the motivation to really explore and find the vast possibilities of this 2,000-year-old technology. So let's take a look at possible pairings with the Gou Rang shield. It was recorded in the Han Dynasty that the shield was paired with the Jian, the Dao, and the Ji. Now each one of these would have a distinct advantage and of course with that have some disadvantages as well. So let's take a quick look. The Han Jian is quite long, so it already has a distinct reach advantage, which can be good when the opponent is much further back. You can rely on more thrusting techniques and some cuts for manipulations. However, once the opponent moves in and it becomes a very close range game, the shield can become an obstacle for your own Jian, and also it limits the amount of chopping power and piercing strength that the sword has. The short pull Ji could also offer a variety of techniques, and the side blade being able to reach around corners could make this a very sneaky and effective weapon. However, it's that very same side blade that could get caught up on your own shield as well as your opponent's weapon or shield in the scrum of combat. So it has to be something you're ready to adapt and adjust for. And lastly, the Dao, which is my preferred pairing, would excel with its agile maneuverability. However, it has a distinct disadvantage with range as the blade is not as long as a Han Jian or a short pull Ji. So it would be at a disadvantage, at least until the distance could be closed. So in the end, each could work, and very well, but what it requires is a good amount of time working with the weapon in drilling and sparring to really unlock the vast techniques that are available with the pairing. Another interesting aspect about the Gou Rang is that there are many depictions of warriors using the Gou Rang in the right hand and their sword in the left hand. Now this is unique because many people learned how to use the sword with the right hand because of battlefield formations and tactics. So to be able to use the Gou Rang in the right hand allowed the user to manipulate and hook and trap and disarm opponents a little bit easier, especially when it came to one-to-one fighting and dueling. Now, as I mentioned, I personally prefer pairing the Gou Rang with the Dao, so in the spirit of traditional Kung Fu training, I created a form. So let's talk about it. Now, the ultimate goal of the form is to provide multiple layers of training for strength development, coordination and dexterity with the shield and another weapon, fundamental techniques for attack and defense, and more advanced and rare techniques for combat. And lastly, it contains some fancy sword work and some flourishes to create a challenging and entertaining set to train with and practice. The fundamentals keep the shield in front and use the sword for cutting, thrusting, chopping, and parrying. Then there are techniques designed for when the shield is in a bind with the opponent's weapon, clearing and allowing the sword to counter, and a number of shield clearing and counter cutting. Then there are flourishing movements designed to develop strength and flexibility when swinging the two around, but also to learn how to move the sword around the shield without getting tangled. This is extremely useful to be able to recover after the posture has been disrupted. There's another section that uses the hook to pull and trap the opponent's weapon, as well as manipulate their stance and create more openings for attack. Now, Like I mentioned, these kind of techniques are more rare in combat, so it shouldn't be something that you should force, but it is something that you should have at the ready for when the opportunity presents itself. In the end, it's a fun form with many benefits of training. However, it's only a small selection of what the shield and another weapon are capable of. So you can use it as a baseline of fundamentals that you can drill and apply later in combat, or at least just keep it in mind when you're drilling with a partner that you can explore some other techniques. Really, it's just that the door has been opened and we're taking a single step inside. And from here, it's just hours of experience and exploration and testing new things to work with the weapon that it's really going to give us a better impression of what this shield is capable of. Now, before we close this episode, I do want to mention a little bit of cultural significance with the Gou Rang shield itself. Now, in ancient Chinese mythology, going back over 2,000 years ago, there was a mythological being called Qiyu. Now, Qiyu has been described to have multiple limbs, sometimes with the head of an animal or the body of an animal, but one thing in particular that you'll find is that in each limb, it's holding a weapon. And one of those weapons is, you guessed it, the gourang. Interestingly enough, Qiyu is still worshipped as a god of war today and has been featured in a number of video games and even as the arch nemesis of the Marvel Comics hero, the Swordmaster. Now, I haven't seen much of the comic other than what I pulled for this video, so I can't confirm if Qiyu from Marvel has many weapons, or a Gou Rang for that matter, but it is still really cool to see some of these ancient mythological, real pieces of culture being integrated into pop culture today. Well, that wraps up this episode of Han Dynasty Weapons. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something about this shield, and I hope you are as hooked as I am on it. Also, I'd love to hear your feedback, especially if you have combat experience with this shield. What are your favorite weapon pairings and what are your observations? What were your advantages? What were your drawbacks in combat? I would love to hear that. I'd also like to know if anybody would be interested in learning the Gou Rang and Dao form. I'm going to be posting a video of it in a separate video, but I can always make a full-length instructional showing all the different moves and techniques, but I want to be sure that anybody's going to be interested in learning that. Lastly, I will leave a link down below to the lkchen website where you can see more about this shield and you can order one for yourself or even just get the specs and build your own. I think that's such a cool thing from lkchen. They just want people to have that passion for learning more about these. So if you're inclined, you can build one yourself. So leave your feedback down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode and I will see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.
Bye.